Welcome everybody to our next session for the U2 Conference 2021. This session's title is Crossing the Line, Who Pushed You Over? Discussing images of time, betrayal, and spiritual engagement on Achtung Baby. This is going to be a great session. We have a panelist today of three fans, Jennifer Swanson, Verlinda Henning, and Joshua Eubanks. It's always good to see a few new faces in these sessions, so thank you for showing up and sharing your thoughts. I know the panelists would like to make a introduction on their own, and then a presentation. And then at the end of that presentation, we'll have some time for questions and chats. So, thanks for joining us. Jennifer, would you start us off?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction. And just on cue, the dog started barking, so we are ready for the laughing gas.
Rock and roll.
I did attend some sessions yesterday, kind of in and out. I really appreciate the scholarly academic side of things. I can't always get in the discussion because I haven't read the book, haven't seen the movie, haven't followed the storyline. But today we have fans. It's me and my YouTube buddies, Verlinda and Joshua. We're big fans, all of us, and we are excited to share some thoughts on crossing the line. I came up with this concept a while ago throughout some discussions, of course, from the So Cruel song, which you all know. So I just have quotes on this presentation. I don't have an actual presentation. These are just quotes. Here's our names, and here we are. You all know the song. I started thinking about lines and who crosses them. Where are they? The lines. It seems like there's lines everywhere these days. There's borders. There's lots of borders. There's walls. There's frontiers. External. Those are external lines. I started thinking about internal lines. We are told in Sunday Bloody Sunday that the trenches are dug within our hearts. So we have lines in our own mentality, our own thinking. So how do we find these lines? Why do we need to find them? What happens when we cross a line? We've seen a lot of lines in the past year or so. I myself was in voting lines. Who was in a voting line? I'm sure everybody lined up. I was in a COVID vaccine line. That's the kind of line I was in. I have some lines in my own family. We don't necessarily agree on politics, so there's a line there, and sometimes I'm not willing to cross that line. So when you're not willing to cross a line, how does that work? I started thinking about the backdrop of Achtung Baby. Early 90s, or as the kids I teach would say, the late 1900s, I believe is what they call it now. I know. It's good to see you. It's good to see you, Stacy. The 1990s, the world pushed many lines. Of course, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the plunge into the fights for independence in Eastern Europe, including the beginning of the Bosnian War, which would play out later in U2's existence. The USSR exploding and imploding, the rise of Boris Yeltsin, the repeal of apartheid, Clarence Thomas hearings. I remember sitting in a college classroom watching that and thinking, is this something? Is this something that will be remembered? And as it turns out, that was a big line that got crossed in many ways. I remember watching the Persian Gulf War on CNN. They had embedded the journalists in the groups that went out. If you remember watching the war live on CNN, I think that influenced a lot of what happened in the Zoo TV tour, but of course that's next year. I remember the New World Order being proclaimed by George Bush, and I remember thinking, well, that's a line. That's maybe not where I wanted to go, but there we are. Double speak was upon us in the 21st century. Fake news is now upon us. Alternative facts, double speak is still with us. For me, the constantly changing nature of Achtung Baby has led to a new place to reflect on the lines being crossed. Everyone has lines, personal lines, physical lines, international borders. This conversation is about those lines. I am a Japanese teacher. I am not Japanese. No, I am Swedish, British descent. I have no Japanese in me. I did live in many and actually saw, I think, 2 concerts in Japan, Zoo TV and Pop Mart, which was great. So that's the introduction. I recently, a friend of mine who I think is on this call, unless she dropped off, went to the Songs of Innocence tour with me a couple years ago, and she's a long time music fan, had never been to a U2 concert. She's my neighbor. I said, hey, you want to go to a U2 concert with me tomorrow? And she said, sure. So we got tickets and I took her, and I was like, oh, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. You know, so excited to share the fan experience. And she said, that's okay. Just let me experience it. I'll be fine. I just want to experience it. And then, you know, what happens in Raised by Wolves, right? The exploding car bombs. And she was not ready for that. And she got shot back in her seat. And she said, thanks a lot, Bono. That really effed me up. And I thought, you know what? That is a big line that just got crossed, that a person who maybe had not previously known about that or thought about that had been really scrambled by that concert experience. And I'm sure you all feel the same way. The concert, the Achtung Baby experience really scrambled our brains in a really good way. We're taking questions in the chat. We'll do a discussion at the end, so the 3 of us will go, and then we'll all just have a discussion about this. These are questions that we're bringing up. I think I speak for all of us when I say none of us are experts on this. We're just sharing what we are interested in and what we follow about U2, what makes us fans and keeps us coming back. So this interview with, okay, so I'm talking about, I'm going to talk about engagement. So for me, I saw these 4 ways that the songs invite us to engage. So engaging with ourselves and each other, engaging in good and bad relationships, engaging with the spirit, and engaging with pain, grief, anxiety, joy, and hope. For me, it starts off with this quote from Bono. You may know this quote after 9/11, when they talked about doing their concerts, and people kept asking them, how can you do these concerts with all this grief going on? And the end of this quote really resonates with me, that he said, we're just a conduit for all this joy, hope, and despair that's coming out. And he was talking about 9/11, but for me, it means always. There's always joy, hope, and despair coming out in our lives because we're human. And people say, oh, rock and roll is great. It just takes people's minds off of it. And Bono said, no, that is not our job. Our job is to take people's minds through it. So that resonates with me a lot about how I thought about the songs for today's presentation. So what does Achtung Baby take us through? What do we need to get through? I feel there's a lot of connections between 1991 and 2021. But now we have the internet, so no one is safe anywhere, ever. Who can you trust? Where can you trust? A friend of mine who's recovering from cancer went to Costco and got COVID. He's fine. But how can you trust the system? Who's your neighbor? How do you know how to get through this life? How are these songs helping us? I do believe that a lot of these songs are like a mirror. And I've always appreciated this quote about seeing things more clearly. So what is a mirror? Well, a mirror is a tool to see ourselves more clearly. And I do feel the Achtung Baby is a kind of mirror to see ourselves. So how do we connect with ourselves? How do we engage in the world around us? We can only change what we see, but yet Acrobat tells us Don't believe what you hear. Don't believe what you see. If you close your eyes, you can feel the enemy. What is the enemy? I have a woman on my board of directors who told me that Dr. Fauci made AIDS for population control. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you, and you will have, and this is the last time I will see you in person. And it's not because you're not vaccinated, it's because of the crazy things you just said about the way things work in the world. So that's out there. You can feel the enemy. If you don't understand that your behavior, and I'm talking about myself too, I'm not saying you, if we don't understand that our behavior is wrong, how can we possibly change it? And that woman doesn't care. She thinks she's right. So those people are out there. Engaging with ourselves is not easy. The enemy within, and Bono told us, I can't change the world, I can change the world in me. So how do I change the world in me? You have to change your own heart first. Coming through the pandemic, of course, this is our second U2 conference online. The beginning of the pandemic, it seemed like things were ending. We were crossing that line into isolation and disengagement from each other. But I do feel like we've connected in new ways that maybe we wouldn't have connected if we didn't have the pandemic. So I'm not wishing a pandemic on us, but it is a line that we were forced to cross, and we did. And here we are connecting with each other on Zoom. These ways are not always fine. This is the quote from just a few days ago, this article, if you saw that on BBC, it's a great article. Edge and U2 always talk about how they're always surprised when people use one in weddings, because one is not really about coming together and being happy and going off frolicking into the meadow. One is about pain and suffering and anxiety and working through that. And Edge says, we will never cross the line and understand each other. It's not like we're all coming together and it's going to be fine. It is not going to be fine. We are not ever going to be the same, and we're not going to see things the same way, but we get to carry each other. At the very least, the message is that we are connected, whether we like it or not. So that lady, the crazy lady that was in my house, there is a connection there. And whether I like it or not, she's in my life and she's on my board. So it's someone that I'm constantly working with and trying to figure out how to handle. But I do find comfort in this message. Things are not fine, and that's okay. I recently just watched the Handmaid's Tale. Has anybody seen Handmaid's Tale? I'm talking about the main character who's stuck in Gilead, and her husband says, she is not fine. She is not fine, but that's okay. We're gonna get through it. We're gonna move on. We do find ways, as the song goes, to hurt each other, and then we do it again. Basic human tendencies sometimes cannot be trusted, but in the end, we do get to carry each other. Like Sam and Frodo, another kind of passion of nerdy passion of mine, Sam and Frodo on the top of Mount Doom. Sam says, I can't carry it, meaning the ring, for you, but I can carry you. Any Tolkien fans here? I think it's a good message, right? The answer to disengagement is to see that it's okay that we're disengaged, and we keep working on those lines. We keep working through things. The second point I wanted to talk about was this from Wild Horses. And I will say, this is like a bad relationship, right? If you are engaging in any of these things, if you're stealing, lying, revenging, or killing people, and then asking if we can still be friends, you are gaslighting people. And we have all learned, I think, what a bad relationship looks like. In this case, I wanted to talk about how I personally am feeling about my country over the last few years. I feel like America is kind of in a bad relationship with me. and possibly America is in a bad relationship with the world. Is the American dream the biggest lie you've ever heard of? Work hard and you can be whatever you want to be, unless there are structural barriers to you achieving that, such as racism, sexism, poverty, lack of affordable housing, childcare, health insurance for those of us with pre-existing conditions. Track dead. People are literally school board meetings and targeting school board members about mask mandates. Trevor Noah, another prophet style person, prophetic voice, says, in America, the dream is to make it out of the ghetto. In Soweto, because there was no leaving the ghetto, the dream was to transform the ghetto. I feel like America has lost this last line, the transforming the ghetto part, that we want to change our country. We just want to leave our problems behind and forget about it. I do feel that moving through some of these personal issues and transforming ourselves, as well as our country, helps us regain what is so great about our country. People ask, well, Trevor Noah was in his famous Facebook speech about George Floyd, which now has 25 million views, by the way, 25 million. He was talking about the social contract and how can Black people be expected to uphold the social contract when the police themselves are not upholding the social contract. And there you go with the Kenosha homicide trial verdict yesterday. We get more of the same, that it's okay to, what did I see the meme this morning? It's okay to throw yourself in the polar bear pit and then kill the polar bears. I do believe this is calling us to recognize that when we are engaged in bad relationships, there's a shadow and a light side of this discussion. Wild Horses shows us the destructive behavior. How do we turn this into constructive behavior? With America, it helps us to understand the relationships that we thought were actually good and the shadow elements that are not good for us. The lyrics have allowed us to be able to see the fractures in society. The American dream may not be real, as Bono said, or is always saying, America is an idea that has not been realized yet. It pushes us over the line. It gives us an opportunity to engage in our country's problems, personal problems as well. Next, I wanted to talk about engaging with spirit. Crossing the line in relation to spirit, whatever religion you are or are not, I think everybody agrees that there is something that does tie us together. There's some kind of spirit in music, in this music. While I have always learned from and seen and appreciated and took seriously the biblical themes in U2 lyrics and imagery, I know not everyone does. I went to a concert with another friend, Amy, who's a devout Catholic. And at the end of that concert, another friend said, hey, you should go to Jen's Sunday school class on the theology of U2. And she said, why is she teaching a U2 class at church? And Sarah said, because there's theology there to be learned. And Amy said, wait, U2 is a Christian band? So it just shows me the multiple layers of the songs, that they can be appreciated so many different ways. The connecting with spirit is massively crossing the line for me, and even more on pop when the spirit is in plain view. We've all seen the video of the band struggling with the writing of One, where Bono is doing his weird little babbling, Bongolese, I guess they call it. Some people call it speaking in tongues. I don't know what that is. But I do see that it's a visual audio representation of the band reaching out to spirit, trying to connect with spirit, to God, or to lyrics or melodies or angels or whatever. And the message has always been that you have to knock before the door will be opened. So if you reach out, as they're reaching out, you will find some connection with spirit. Does this ever happen to you? You're going through something difficult. You're like sitting in a doctor's office and a U2 song comes on, or you're in a situation like I was in a bank one time and I was trying to do this loan and it was really stressing me out, and like With or Without You came on. You're like, what is happening? this is actually a thing. It isn't just coincidence. I mean, it really does mean something. It really is something. It's a connection with spirit. And it's because we are reaching out that the spirit finds us and we are able to be open to that. Finally, I wanted to talk about engaging with our own pain, anxiety, and grief. I feel like Achtung Baby is full of those things, of those themes. And it sort of normalizes these things. I mean, they say, normalize the behavior, like a friend of mine's son came out recently as non-binary. Okay, so the more you talk about this, the more normalized it gets. And Achtung Baby seems to do that for me with grief and pain and anxiety. Walking through some of these things, I mean, End of the World, and everybody knows the lyrics, drowning in sorrows. Of course, we know the band at the time was going through losing Edge's wife, and as the U2 clan, right? I think of them as a clan. They're very tribalistic in the way they think about their community. Losing a clan member, a tribal member, and he came out of that personal connection with grief. Of course, Bono and Larry losing their moms when they were 14. I lost my dad when I was 17, and I always felt like there was a lot of connection with their messages and their ability to connect with their grief and loss and put that into the songs. I did find that this is the Frida Kahlo quote. I think Bono just stole it from her. I mean, it steals from everybody, but but I do feel like this is hopeful because it means that although the sorrows and the grief and the pain and anxiety are all there, when we work through it and we connect with it, we actually come out the other side. Achtung Baby is not just like a good old time, right? I don't know if any U2 album is just a good old time, but it is a vehicle for understanding things differently, crossing lines that we didn't know existed, working through things, coming out the other side, and being recommitted to ourselves, to each other, to spirit, and to new ways of accompanying each other and ourselves through grief. It's allowing for that exploration of boundaries inside ourselves and in our world, and not having to do it alone. So that's what I had to say. I know Fonda, my friend that was at the concert with me, that got blown back in her seat, and the car bomb, said she had to sit down and cry for 5 minutes, and that's true. I watched that live performance last night, and after that, no one was clapping. People were just like, So, but that's the U2 concert, right? You're on your feet, and then you're sitting down crying for 5 minutes, and then you're on your feet again. So that's it. I guess I'll hand it off to my YouTube buddy, Verlinda. I should have said I'm in Northern Virginia and DC, and we're all in different places, but we're all one, but we're not the same. So Verlinda, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Jen. And I'm Verlinda Henning. I hail from Memphis, Tennessee. You can probably pick the accent up. And I came to this idea with a focus on time. I am professionally a human resources and leadership consultant. I also mentor for the University of the South in their Education for Ministry program. And I have a real love, passionate, weird engagement with topics like this. So here we go. So crossing the timeline on Achtung Baby from 1991 to 2021, we got to make it on time. So time for me was an overarching concept on this whole album, but it's reflected in so many different forms and scopes. And, when I started, I did what most people do. I said, well, let's look up what time means. What do people say time is? Well, there was a pretty dry definition from Webster, a non-spatial continuum measured in terms of events which succeed one another from past to present to future. But no, that's not time here. To me, time on this album is like a time charge. It's time to ignite to explode, to blow things up and change things and make us think about things differently. Achtung Baby got released on November 18th of 1991. It was in a world that was marked by rising and falling of institutions, an era of massive global upheaval that Jen talked about, a period of real confusion that was in that gray place between despair, where are we? What's going to happen to us? And hope. And I look back at some of the things that happened around this time. On November the 4th, Imelda Marcos of the Million Pairs of Shoes returned from exile to the Philippines. She promptly got arrested for tax fraud and corruption and got released the next day. On November 6th, Boris Yeltsin outlawed the Communist Party. On November 7th, Magic Johnson, and yes, I'm a basketball fan, announced that he had HIV and was retiring from the LA Lakers. And over 2 years earlier, the Berlin Wall came down. I'm 63. I grew up knowing the wall was there. I never expected that to come down in my lifetime. As the band was beginning to record the Achtung Baby in Hansa Studios back in October of '90, the reunification of Berlin had just been made official. That happened on October the 3rd. So when I began this idea of thinking about time, it was going to be a standalone, but I had the good fortune to connect with Jennifer and Joshua, and the idea became part of a much broader concept, this crossing the line business. Throughout this section, I've got some questions that I'd love to invite you to think about, to consider, and share with us when we get to the discussion portion, or pop them in the chat, and I'll show the questions at the end of my section. So, how does time on the album cross the line or cross the lines? How does that work here? Well, for the band as a whole, I think with the focus on the sound, the music, the songs, it was a new era for them. They'd been in an Americana roots mood. Joshua Tree brought them over here. Rattle and Hum brought them to my hometown, where they recorded in Sun Studios, where they slid down the bluffs on Riverside Drive with Edge on his cardboard square, where they went to Graceland and saw Elvis's palace and Larry sitting on the motorcycle and talking about how he felt going to the Elvis gravesite. If you've ever been to Memphis and done that, it is an eerie, profound, spiritual experience. If you don't think God exists, it is. And that was a huge change for them. It made some fans on our side of the Atlantic feel disenfranchised, like, oh, you cut us out. You were all about us, and now you've gone back over there to a world that we don't get. For the band as individuals, they were having life changes. They were crossing a line from being young and rock and roll and stop the traffic to an awareness of mortality and how life changes. And for the world, it was a new era. Institutions rose and fell, global upheaval, confusion. And the lyrics in these songs, some more than others, reflect these changes and life changes and just what's going on. So what are some of the references about time on the album? And even better than the real thing, they're pleading. You hear that? One more chance, one last chance, one last dance, and one. I mean, we've talked one to death because it has so many different layers, but that line is haunting. It's too late tonight to drag the past out into the light. But if you can't drag the past out, how does the light ever get brighter again? And is it getting better? Or do you feel the same? Where are we? Where are things? Are we ever going to be okay? Again, were we ever okay? They warn listeners that you miss too much these days if you stop to think, and until the end of the world. And they remind us how fast time goes by. In Zoo Station, time's a train. It makes the future the past. That impressed me because I think when I was in my 30s, I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh my God, time's going by so fast. They were. And, the timelines they talk about are simultaneously personal to the band and they're universal. And as I've gone back and forth and listened over and over to this album, the call for another chance, I think, is something that's pretty universal. I've been in plenty of situations where I needed another chance. Sometimes the grace was there, whether it was a fresh start in a relationship or a vocation or redemption or just at life. My husband died young at 45. He got one second chance at life, and that stays with me. And that has informed the way I think about time. But when you get that second chance, you have to have the courage to bring the past out and talk about it and be honest about it. It's easy to read some of the tensions the band had internally as you look at the lyrics, but the fact that they cared enough to struggle through that and continue to create together is something we appreciate and celebrate here. So some of the questions, what made you want another chance and how did that come about? What do you have to drag out into the light to get another chance? Where in the world, globally, do we need redemption now? Another moment about crossing the line for time is until the end of the world. You miss too much these days if you stop to think. I have to remind myself to stop to think. When I'm on this, ping, 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 chirp, 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 beep, beep, beep. And it's send an emoji, make a funny GIF, just say, okay, I got it. The constant pace of life makes me have to force myself to stop to think. So what do we miss when we stop? Is it anything worth missing? Do we, when we look at that song more closely, the Judas and Jesus imagery, are we Judas? Are we angry when things don't go our way or move at our pace? Or are we Jesus who wants to take the time to think, to consider what life is worth, what the people we value are worth? So what pushes us across the timelines of our personal lives to stop and think? What makes us stop and think? Is it always something drastic or something more instinctual? For me, one thing that I've been missing, and this presentation has helped with that a lot, is missing community. And the pandemic has made me stop and appreciate the community I have and the community that's formed here. And I think taking the time to think about that has been good for me and made people appreciate it more. So another lyric, time is a train. It makes the future the past. On my street, there's a train track right down here. I hear the freight trains pull out and the horn honks. And, if you're waiting for them to pass, you can set your watch by them. But as they pull out of the yard, they pick up speed faster and faster, and everything's a blur. And this line that time is a train and makes the future the past, that is haunting to me. It feels like something a lot older person than them would have written. But the world they knew and the world we knew then was changing drastically. And let's face it, the world they live in is so different from ours. It seems like they were aware early of how fast life can go by. So what are some things globally that have made you realize, hey, time is really going by fast? When did you first get aware of how fast time moves? And as I head toward the last section of my presentation, thinking about the idea of love and time on this album. From love is blindness, love is clockworks and cold steel. Now, they're talking there about Edge's marriage. Jen talked about that, how that was breaking down, and how their tribe was splintering, perhaps for the first time. And that line, love is clockworks and cold steel, that's not how we think about love. Love is hearts and flowers and sweet and fuzzy. And I read that line very differently. When I think about clockworks, things mesh together. The gears turn and everything fits. And steel can be cold, but there's strength in that coldness. And that means to me that love at its best is when forces mesh together. The time that it tells there is the story of love in its own time. And love as blindness is strong as steel. In my house, there's a mantle clock that predates the American Civil War. And I grew up hearing that thing chime on the half hour and the hour, and that reassurance that time and life continue. So love as clockwork to me is a positive. It resonates with me. And what are some images about love that cross the line that the band uses on this album? How does that affect the way you think about love? And the title itself, Achtung, baby. I mean, you look at that and go, oh, they're riffing on something, Achtung, baby. But Achtung is attention. That's calling us to pay attention to something. It's a call to a time when we have to pay attention. In that time, we talked about all the different things that were happening in the world. But when we listen to this album today, what is Achtung, baby calling us to pay attention to in this time? And in the wake of the pandemic, where every part of life has been weaponized and politicized, and we feel so isolated, this has crossed another line. It's built walls between us, and this anniversary of Achtung Baby is an alert that we have to reclaim and rebuild community, or we may be crossing a line here that we can't ever uncross. And with that, let me share my slide of questions briefly. There we go. Those are just some of the things that I touched on in my presentation, and we'll chat a little bit and invite your responses to those. And now I want to turn it over to the third member of our Trinity, and that would be my friend Joshua.
Thank you so much, Verlinda. That was a really a stirring presentation you gave, and I enjoyed that from both of you ladies very much. I'm very pleased to be here today and to be a part of this. As Verlinda said, my name is Joshua Eubanks, and I've been thinking a lot about some of the lines that you two crossed, moving from the 1980s into the 1990s, and how that changed them in their own personal lives. And so I will be speaking to you today about two of U2's most celebrated, beloved music videos, those being Anton Corbin's video For One and Kevin Godley's video for Even Better Than the Real Thing. So we will be discussing how they relate and contrast, and what those videos have to say to us today, 30 years after the release of the album that they were promoting. First up, Kevin Godley's piece for Even Better Than the Real Thing. Now, I have loved this video since the first time I saw it. I'm sure you've all seen it, with the rapidly whirling camera work that emulates the momentum of the song and its bright, living cinematography. The portion of the video that is particularly germane to my topic today is the appearance of the Doppelgangers, a group of U2 lookalikes who were filmed miming the song in question. Now, the reason that this is relevant is that it was the first time someone else appeared as U2 promoting one of U2's own songs in an officially sanctioned product. I'm thinking a little bit about Negativland, and they kind of inadvertently promoted U2's product, but they didn't appear as the band. But in this case, it was as if the band had decided to give not just a permissive nod. That had been done before. In this case, U2 is sharing their stage and saying to the fans, these carbon copies are just as good as we are. In fact, they might be even better. We should also take note of the wax models that appear in the video. Another example of the band's embracing of artifice. Yes, there was definitely a line being crossed here, a line with, on one side, the sort of naive earnestness of the 1980s, and on the other side, the worldly artifice of the 1990s. Now that Zoo TV is firmly in our hindsight, I can claim, I couldn't at the time, but we can all claim that we knew what U2 was up to in 1992 when this video was released to the market. Speaking as someone, though, who didn't see the video at the time, I was away at boarding school and didn't have access to a lot of MTV and the other things that were going on. So speaking as someone who did not see the video until the late 90s and was honestly perplexed by it at the time, I can truthfully say that I had no idea what the meaning of the video was when it first hit the airwaves. All I knew was that it was a series of interesting visuals that were sublimely suited to the song they were promoting. As I said, the camera circling around the real Bono and the other band members. I'm particularly thinking of Larry as he's playing the drums and his eyes follow the camera as it goes over him. But the camera circling around as the song speeds along still remains one of the music video highlights of my life. So here was a video that functions or functioned, still today it functions on multiple levels. Now, if casual fans felt the same as I did at the time about the piece, that it was just a rockin' good time, that was okay with the band. If, however, someone chose to dig a little deeper into what the members of U2 were trying to say with the spot, then that level was available too. So you might all be asking yourselves, what exactly is on this other level? What was U2 trying to say with this video and with the Doppelgangers and with the wax and the artifice? To understand that, we need to also take a look at another promotional spot from the same era, the Anton Corbijn directed video for One. And I'm not talking about the director's cut that you might see on YouTube. That focuses, I think, in some ways on some of the same things, but more on the relationship between Bono and his father, Bob. I just thought I should make that clear. Of course, we all know, because of the cross-dressing in mind, we all know that this is one of U2's most well-known music videos, either famous or infamous, depending on your perspective. As I said, the video features, in addition to Bono's father, Bob, on location in the newly unified Berlin, the members of the band lounging about in women's clothing. So once again, the members of U2 were replacing their normal everyday selves with alter egos. But to what end? What was the purpose? I believe that the entirety of the Achtung Baby era, including Zeropa, the Zoo tour, all the videos, all of that, was all about all part of U2's campaign to cut down the Joshua Tree, or to escape from the constraints placed on them by the media and by their own fans, maybe even by themselves. Now, Anton Corbijn's spot for One was later rejected by the band because it was felt that dressing in drag in a video meant to highlight the AIDS crisis was drawing too direct a line between AIDS and homosexuals. But if that wasn't the band's intention, what was the purpose of the cross-dressing? It's my belief that dressing in drag was meant to highlight the connection to the song's lyric. We're one, but we're not the same. And both Verlinda and Jen spoke very eloquently about some of the lyrics to One and what that song means, how it's not a love song. It's a song about divisions. And as Jen said, that's another line that we all draw in our lives. But by dressing in drag, the members of U2 are highlighting the duality of human nature. We are all part man and part woman. We all have masculine and feminine sides to our personalities. More importantly, however, and more to the point that I'm trying to make, members of U2 were barely recognizable as their normal selves when they were dressed in this drag outfit. Now, the first time they dabbled in wearing disguises was when they dressed as the Dalton brothers while on the Joshua Tree tour. Some of you might remember that was kind of a silly time. I've noticed in U2's career, there's often a smaller, kind of a trial experiment with the phases that U2 goes through before the phase in question actually begins. For example, many people cite the song God Part 2 from Rattle and Hum as a precursor to the sounds that U2 made on the Achtung Baby album. So it was with the Great Disguise phase, the Great Disguise experiment. Bono, Edge, Adam, and Larry must have been desperate to find a way to hide in plain sight, to find some way of disguising their famous rock star faces. So they dressed up as country and Western singers. Now, nowadays, you might think of this as kind of a silly exercise, and it was. At the time, that might have been the point. The boys weren't having the good time that one might expect with a company being rock's hottest ticket, as Time magazine proclaimed it to be in a 1987 cover story. They weren't enjoying themselves as themselves, so they went out in search of new identities. Fast forward a couple of years, when the entire campaign was about removing themselves from the earnestness of the 80s, and we find several examples of U2 obscuring their own identities. The promo spots for Even Better Than the Real Thing and One weren't the only examples of videos with new identities. Consider Bono's new stage persona, The Fly. I say new, it was new at the time. Now it's 30 years old. But that persona premiered in the promotional video for the song of the same name, The Fly, that announced to the world that the new U2 was here in late 91. Now, definitely, The Fly was an attempt to distance the singer from his earlier identity. The interesting thing here, at least to me, is that I think that Bono was comfortable in his new patent leather suit. He liked his new self. So we have it that Even Better Than the Real Thing and One were further attempts to obscure the U2 of old. Like a stage magician waving his right hand while performing a trick with his left, it was all about hiding the truth. As I stated earlier, though, these new identities were comfortable for the band members. It was also noteworthy that U2 chose to highlight the Trabant in their promotional material from the time, notably on the covers to some of the singles from the album. I think all the singles except for one had the band members. You can see it on Jen's background there. That's a picture of them from the, yeah, thank you. Those pictures are taken from some of the album singles of the band and the Trabant. I draw your attention to this because the Trabant was a symbol of the changes taking place in Europe at the time. And that is another way in which U2 themselves were changing. Originally, a band from Ireland, they wore the UK influence on their collective sleeve throughout the first few tours over the beginning years of the band. Following this, there was a period of time in which U2 focused on and drew their influence from America. That I think if you caught Ian Ryan's presentation last night, he talked in depth about how The Unforgettable Fire was kind of U2 observing America from a distance. Joshua Tree is kind of U2 living in America or absorbing America. And then Rattle and Hum is kind of their commentary on what they learned when they were here. So when Bono famously announced in Dublin toward the end of the Lovetown tour in 1989, and the band had to go away and dream it all up again, some observers thought that this signaled a return to the band's Irish roots. Instead, the band went to Berlin and turned their high-powered lens on Europe for the first time. Now, I understand that some of U2's fans at the time felt very much betrayed by the band's new direction. U2 had crossed a line, after all, a line that separated Ireland from the rest of the world. From this point forward, U2 no longer belonged to Dublin, but were truly a worldwide operation. All of this was just another step in the band's metamorphosis, and it's part of what makes U2 so special. For those of us who have been paying attention, we literally got to watch them grow up right before our eyes. The band's story is the story of a human life played out on a grand scale. The 90s, the band's most experimental time, is analogous to the late teens and early 20s in standard human years, when the person in question is moving out on their own, traveling to new places, learning about the world around them, and so on. For many people, this is also the time when they experiment with their own identity, trying to discover who they really are. So it was with U2. Only in the case of the band, they were also trying to escape from their earlier selves at the same time as they were building these new characters. It must have been difficult to push back against their old selves, to create as much distance as possible between themselves and who they had been previously. Most of us, as we grow and change, we don't have to say, hey, that old me, that's not me anymore. I'm not that same person. It's evident to the people around us. But when you're a celebrity or a rock star, that's all that we know of our rock stars and our celebrities, is what we've observed. So as far as some of the band members knew, they were betraying their true identities. Whoever we feel ourselves to be, it is not easy to supplant ourselves with a new personality at any stage of our development. But isn't that what personal growth is all about? We often hear, be yourself and everything else will fall into place. But what if we're not sure who that is? I think that even if we had asked U2 during the late 80s if they were being true to themselves, they would have answered in the affirmative, but hesitantly. So many of U2's struggles during that decade are about trying to reconcile being rock stars with being good family men, for example, or remaining true to their religious beliefs. That's why I think U2 devoted so much time to changing themselves in the early 90s. They were becoming their true selves, but I'm not sure they knew who their true selves were. Embracing the rock and roll lifestyle to an extent, but still holding on to what made them unique in the first place, the heart and soul of U2, was a long time process that maybe is still ongoing today. Perhaps the biggest change that came out of this era for the members of U2 was they learned to have fun. Life is hardly worth living if we can't enjoy ourselves, even if we are world famous rock stars. Maybe especially if we're world famous rock stars. Just a few days ago, as I sit here, and I'm sure a lot of you caught this same interview when Bono and Edge were on British DJ Joe Wiley's show for the 30th anniversary of Achtung Baby. One of the topics that came up was the fact that Achtung Baby was the band's attempt to return to the selves that they had occupied in the late 70s and early 80s. Bono mentioned, and I quote here, that they wanted to find some songs that would allow them to be the people that they were in their early incarnation of the band. I think that the feeling was that they had become far too serious and wanted to get back to a place that they enjoyed what they did for a living. I've come to realize that by trying all of these different selves on for size, changing them like one changes outfits for different occasions, the members of U2 were becoming their true selves, not their natural selves, because they had tried that in the 80s and it didn't work out for them, but their authentic selves. And I think that that is the great truth that we can glean from U2's music videos for Achtung Baby. Each of us is a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit punk and a little bit folk with maybe some techno thrown into the mix somewhere. It isn't about following a trend. As cliche as it sounds, it really is about being yourself, whoever that might be at any given time. And that's a lesson U2 learned 30 years ago. The only question remaining is, have we all learned it as well? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Joshua and Verlinda. My new U2 buddies, our new little community that we've been able to form. I hope everyone enjoyed what we had to say. We did want to start a discussion on some of these themes about crossing the line. And maybe that's the first question, Verlinda, you think is what other places do y'all see themes of crossing the line on Achtung Baby, on the songs? So we'll just set it up. Anybody could just unmute themselves and talk.
Jump in there.
I guess one line that I continually see U2 crossing, and I do think that in a way they crossed it even at Achtung Baby, is that, and maybe this is an American construct, but there's a huge construct between the flesh and the spirit, huge. And I think American, especially American expressions of spirituality, I feel like there's a huge dearth where U2 feel it and very few other things do, movies, literature, of where you can legitimately explore the spirit and the flesh. And that, yes, in a sense, it is transgression, but I think it's a necessary transgression. In a sense, even from a Christian sensibility, Christ is a transgression of the flesh and the spirit. Those two worlds we don't think should come together. And a lot of the issues with Christianity, at least, is that we're afraid of them coming together. And I feel a lot of collision between the flesh and the spirit in Achtung Baby and in others. And as somebody who kind of crosses a line all the time, as an English major, as someone who's very academic, who read Derrida, read all of that, and yet as a committed Catholic, that yet the Catholic world seems to almost be afraid in their music of the flesh. I find it comforting in a way that at least you two are okay with those two worlds.
I think that's an understanding of the whole person, and that you are not in these little boxes. The spirit box is here, the flesh box is here, the mental box, whatever is over here. We're together and we're deliciously complicated. And that's what the videos Joshua talked about and what Jen had to say. All of that reflects the complexity and the beauty of humanity. Thank you, Megan.
Nothing personal, but I hope I never have to hear the term flesh box again.
Flesh box.
Well, Ryan, run with it. Make art out of it. Who knows? Maybe that'll be in the YouTube.
It's gonna be trending. Yeah, thanks, Megan. This beautiful connection. And crossing that line in those ways is really what brings a lot of us to the music. The depth of those issues. Flesh box. And Brian, did you want to say something else, or was just you wanted to say that?
So I might pose a question as our time is rapidly running out. But where in the world do you see any particular issue or challenge that we really need that second chance, and that what they keep talking about, we crossed a line, but we need to reclaim something. We need new opportunities and second chances. Where do you see that?
Speaking for myself, and you kind of alluded to this, I think it's absolutely true that the US has crossed a line on the world stage. A lot of times when I'm interacting with U2 fans from around the world, I kind of try to hide the fact that I'm from the US, because I don't know what they might be thinking about us. So
yeah, bad relationship, right? Yes. Anybody else crossing a line, or where those lines are crossed, or how we need to work on those?
I'd say own the fact that you're from the US. Be a good representative. Show that not all of us are dinglings. Yeah, I mean, I know that, like, sometimes people from the US will say, "Oh, I'm from Canada," and I guarantee you they could not name all the provinces. They couldn't, and territories. They couldn't do it. Own the fact that you're from the US and be a good rep, and yeah, just show that there are many lines to be crossed in the US. We're not monolithic. Yeah, it's not always fun to be from here, but that doesn't mean you can't be a good rep.
that's a good point, Matt. Thank you.
Just something that was brought to mind about the US specifically is what is said in American Soul. And admittedly, that was not my favorite song on Songs of Experience, but there is a line there that really hit me hard as an American, as a person. And there's a moment in a life where a soul can die in a person, in a country, when you believe the lie. And so I took it personally as my soul dying, but also as a message to America that if we don't want to die, we have got to stop believing the lie. And America is a country of is very much this feeling of that a lot of America's image, even among Americans, is one of delusion. And that if we want to actually have a second chance, we have to recognize the truth.
Before the 2016 election, the Washington Post, our hometown newspaper here, changed its tagline to "Democracy dies in darkness." And I thought, well, that's awfully melodramatic. And then I spent 4 years thinking that is true. And that the news, Washington Post shining a light on certain issues that maybe we don't want to see or hadn't seen. And that's to your point, Megan, about the soul dying.
And being able to have the conversation, to drag these hard things out in the light and talk about it without dehumanizing each other, because that's where we have failed miserably.
I'd like to chime in a little bit about crossing of lines. I'm Fonda, I'm Jennifer's neighbor. And, of course, we all know that lines have been crossed throughout history. And if these lines weren't crossed, we wouldn't have some of the opportunities we have today. Just recently, there's, I can't remember the anniversary for the suffragettes standing on the White House lawn, crossing that line, saying this is unacceptable. And when people cross a line they shouldn't cross, we need to be responsible and point out that that is not acceptable. And just this week, we saw a line was crossed and no one's happy about it. That some people have certain privileges in this life just because they were born as the person they were, appear to be the person they are. And so I think we will always continue to cross lines, see lines crossed, and we need to be the ones who recognize the lines that should be crossed and questioned. And, thanks a lot, Bono, for bringing this to my attention. He tells the truth on a lot of things. He makes us all, you two definitely makes us think about things like those lines that were crossed that shouldn't have been, and the lines that should be crossed.
Thanks, Fonda.
I wanted to talk about, thank you all for each of your different perspectives on this the same material. I took a lot of notes, actually. So thank you. It occurs to me that this line crossing, this time crossing concept, it's really specific, I think, to the, I'm age cohort with the band, so I'm probably a little bit older than some of y'all, but not all y'all. So living through that time, living through the 90s, living through having been a fan in Joshua Tree and that sound, and then feeling the betrayal, of course, of the first sounds of Achtung Baby. That's, in hindsight, what did I know? But I was trying to figure myself out. I was in my late 20s at the time, right? My mid 20s. And I didn't know who I was. The 90s were really, really rough for me personally. There was a lot of, I want to say exploration, but that sounds very exotic. It really wasn't, but it was exploration. Wait, what do I want out of this life? What can I bring to the table in my community? And who is my community? And I often resist the American center. I'm from Los Angeles. I've lived on the West Coast all my life, so that's all I know. But I often resist trying to project onto YouTube an American-centric point of view, because they're from Dublin and they lived in a very different experience than I did. And I really want to bring that to my understanding of what their writing process is. And the idea of them dreaming it all up again from a Dublin perspective looking during the Joshua Tree era towards the US, the idea of the US, the idea of rock and roll, to the idea of Europe and what does it mean for a Dubliner to be a European. I thank you for all three of you putting these thoughts in my head. I don't have any more insight right now other than they're going to be tumbling in there for a while. So thank you.
I would push back a little bit on not viewing them from an American standpoint, because Bono has moved to New York like half time. Like, he doesn't live in Dublin anymore. He lives mostly in New York. Edge lives primarily in Malibu. They chose to become Americans. I don't even know if they're American. They may be American citizens at this point. I have no idea. But they live here so much. They have clearly been affected by American culture and adopted so much of American culture. Larry's the only one who still lives full time in Dublin. Adam lives in Brazil right now. And I don't think it's unfair to judge them by an American lens, just because they have very clearly wanted to adopt American culture and American ideas and live here. So if you want to judge them by an American lens, I think that's a justifiable option.
Yeah, that's the same
Fair
point I
enough.
was gonna make. I think that Bono in particular invites that comparison to a YouTube perspective. So much of his work in the last few years, especially on Songs of Experience, is about coming from a perspective of an American, maybe to an extent viewing America from the outside world, but in a way that I think chafed a lot of Americans, that they felt, well, if you're not an American, you don't have the right to speak about us like this. But I think he identifies with America because of the idea of America. It's something that he embraces, definitely.
Well, totally, but they actively took America. It wasn't like America was forced on them. They actively took it. So if they want to take inspiration from America and live in America and try to build housing developments in Malibu in America, they should definitely be able to be judged by American standards. I don't think viewing them as strictly European, I'm not going to say it's not fair, but it's not accurate, is what I would say.
Well, it's interesting that, because that's another crossing the line theme, right? That who are Americans anyway? So, I mean, I grew up with a lot of kids in California who were Japanese American or Korean American or Chinese American, first generation, second generation. Well, and then I started thinking about it. Well, I'm fourth generation Swedish, but I don't really identify as that. I just identify as a white American. So there is some kind of construct of culture and what it means to be an American, whether if you're from a certain place or another place. And U2 continues to cross those lines. If they're living in Malibu or Dublin or wherever. I mean, I lived in Japan for 6 years and I definitely did not become Japanese. I identify with a lot of parts of Japanese culture. I've adopted things like taking my shoes off at the front door, or giving money to people in an envelope because money's dirty, so we don't want to touch it. I mean, those are kind of cultural things that are Japanese things that I guess I kind of absorbed, but it's not cultural. I mean, I haven't adopted their culture as my own. It's just parts of things that kind of made it into my life. But it is kind of that crossing the line experience to say, well, I'm from here, but I'm from California too. Stacy and I are from LA, and then I lived in Japan 6 years, and now I'm in Virginia. I've crossed a lot of lines myself too with the geography and moving around, and that, like Stacy said, it kind of makes you who you are. You cross certain lines. I always felt that Bono was out there, and Edge. I mean, all of them are out there trying to get input. So there's a lot of input. That's why they went to Berlin, right? To get the input so that they could get the output. So if you don't have any input into your life, if you're not reading and absorbing and understanding things, then how can you possibly produce an Achtung baby. So with great pain and strife comes great results sometimes. In this case, definitely the
I
case.
thought you were going for a Spider-Man quote there for a minute. I was waiting for great responsibility to come up. But, you know, I would say in different cultures and parts of the world resonate at different times. I'm half British, you know. Now, if you talk to me at 4 this afternoon, I'm having tea, but I'm American too. So, you know, it depends on where you are in your life and what resonates, I think. And we all cross that line all the time.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Megan.
It's interesting. You said that you spent 6 years in Japan. This is my 2nd year back in the States. And I spent 6 years in Taiwan. My husband worked there and I worked there. And before that, we spent a lot of time, maybe 2 years in various states in America. And one of the things that I kind of take from Achtung Baby is this sense of almost rooted without root. And yet, in a sense, like being okay with that. And as an American, it feels like one of the things you're supposed to be is patriotic, almost to the point of being nationalistic. And I love how Achtung maybe kind of represents that crossing of lines of the different national identities, of being American, of being Irish, of being European. And as somebody who has not spent in the last 16 years, more than 3 years in any one place, whether it be another country, whether it be a state with their own national or state identities, I do find that that's one of the things that sometimes people kind of struggle with you too, is in a sense, do they have roots? And they do, but every time they change, it's almost like, well, you don't have roots anymore. You've lost your sense of roots. And in a sense, that's true, but in a sense, it's not true at all, because you two have still kept that line of spiritual sense, of ultimate rootedness, of family rootedness. And so I think it's a bit of a paradox in the idea of being rooted and unrooted at the same time. And that could bring it even to the idea of Edge and Bono having residences in America, which is again a very Irish thing to do in a stereotypical sense. So I do think that that's also some lines they cross, or definitely lines of national identity.
Couple things I would say in response to that. One of my best friends is from Taiwan, and I miss beef noodle soup so much. I miss beef noodle soup so much. It's so good. It is so good. Secondly, one of the things I've noticed, I study languages, and I'm really interested in languages. And the Irish accent is the most similar accent to the American accent that I've found, just in how vowels and consonants are pronounced. And I don't think we can discount talking about crossing a line, but also how close the lines are together between Irish culture and American culture, just how many Irish people came to the US. My mom is from England, but my great grandparents were from Ireland. I'm half Irish, so I don't think we really give enough thought to how much Irish culture has affected American culture, especially. I shouldn't say American culture. I should say certain parts of Caucasian American culture, if that makes sense.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Verlinda and Joshua and Jennifer, and see you all soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.